Have you ever just stopped and wondered what the world looks like on a single, really chaotic day? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to hit pause on one day, March 15th, 2026, and just look at a handful of headlines that show a planet teetering right on the edge. Let's dive in.
So the whole day is just completely overshadowed by one central story, a war in the Middle East that is escalating and fast. We're talking about the United States, Israel, and Iran. And this isn't some far-off conflict. Its shockwaves are being felt literally everywhere, from what you pay for gas to the highest levels of global diplomacy.
All right, so let's start right at the epicenter of the crisis, which is, of course, the military conflict itself. Because this is where the decisions made and the actions taken on this one day are going to have the most immediate and, frankly, violent consequences. And we start with a really clear, really hardline stance coming out of the White House. This one quote from President Trump tells you everything you need to know. It signals that any hope for de-escalation, well, it's off the table, at least for now. The message is just totally unambiguous. The U.S. is digging in for a long fight. And right here, you can see this dangerous feedback loop in action. While the U.S. is bracing for a longer war, Iran's Revolutionary Guard hits back with direct threats against Israeli leadership. You know, it's that classic tit-for-tat escalation where each side just keeps raising the stakes. And this is not just tough talk. These are not empty threats. On this day, Iran crosses a major threshold by launching a Sejal ballistic missile at Israel. This is a first during this conflict, and it is a significant, absolutely terrifying military escalation that completely changes the dynamic of the war. Okay, so let's shift gears and look at the first and most immediate global consequence of this war, a full-blown energy crisis. Now, to really get why this becomes a global crisis, you have to understand the Strait of Hormuz. Think of it as a critical artery for the entire world's economy. A huge chunk of the planet's oil flows through this one narrow passage. And on March 15th, Iran basically shuts it down. The immediate impact is just stark. The moment the strait is closed, the global oil supply just drops off a cliff. And that, of course, throws energy markets into a complete tailspin, and it prompts this mad scramble for some kind of global response. So the U.S. response is muscular, to say the least. President Trump doesn't just condemn the action, he calls for an international naval coalition to literally force the strait back open. This move takes the crisis from a regional war to a potential global military confrontation over resources. And while that military option is on the table, other countries are taking drastic economic measures. Japan announces a record release from its strategic oil reserves. We're talking a massive 80 million barrels. This just shows you how desperate the situation really is, especially for nations that depend on that energy. You know, with all the geopolitics and economic chaos, it is so easy to lose sight of the most tragic consequence. So let's just take a moment here to look at the very real, very human cost of this conflict. 6. On this day, the Pentagon identifies 6 U.S. service members who were killed. And they didn't die in a direct firefight, but in a refueling plane crash in Iraq. A crash that was directly linked to the massive logistical effort needed to sustain this regional war. And on the very same day, in the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces kill a Palestinian family of 4, a couple and their 2 children, during military incursions. 2 different headlines, 2 terrible tragedies, just showing the devastating and incredibly far-reaching impact of the violence. And then, cutting through all the noise of war declarations and military strategy, a really powerful moral voice emerges. Pope Francis escalates his plea, speaking directly to world leaders and demanding an immediate ceasefire. It's just a moment of reflection in an otherwise completely chaotic day. But here's the thing, right? Even as this massive crisis is unfolding, the rest of the world doesn't just stop. Life, politics, and even these incredible moments of triumph continue, often in really stark contrast to the headlines we're seeing from the conflict. And wow, the contrast is just striking. On the same day, you've got the machinery of government grinding on in 2 vastly different systems. In France, people are out participating in the first round of local elections, while in North Korea, a very strictly controlled parliamentary election is taking place. And then you have this, a moment of pure national celebration. While so much of the world is focused on conflict, India wins its 3rd 2020 World Cup, defeating New Zealand by 96 runs. It's just a powerful reminder that life absolutely continues beyond the crisis. And the headlines from around the world just keep pouring in. In Kenya, the death toll from terrible floods rises to 66. In Italy, the U.S. para-ice hockey team achieves this stunning three-peat championship. And in Brazil, former President Jair Bolsonaro is hospitalized. It's this dizzying collage of global events, all happening on the same day. So, with all this pressure, you have to ask, how is the world's diplomatic order actually holding up? Well, the answer reveals this really fragile, constantly shifting landscape of alliances and priorities. You know, a crisis like this often creates some very strange bedfellows. To fight the energy crisis caused by Iran, the U.S. makes a pretty controversial move. It eases some sanctions on Russian oil. It's intended to stabilize markets, but it comes at the really high cost of angering key European and Ukrainian allies. And get this, even as the U.S. is managing a war, its other great power rivalry hasn't been put on pause. High-level trade talks between the U.S. and China are kicking off in Paris. It's a sign that even in a world on fire, that long-term strategic competition between these two giants just keeps on going. So this really paints a clear picture, right? A complex web of action and reaction. You have the U.S. juggling war and diplomacy. You have Iran acting as the main escalator. Japan is in full-on crisis response mode. And both Russia and China are working to capitalize on the shifting geopolitical landscape. Each power is playing its part on this global stage. So as we pull back, we see a single 24-hour period that's defined by all these interlocking events: military escalation, economic panic, human tragedy, and incredibly complex diplomacy. It's a snapshot of a world under just immense strain. And that leaves us with the final question. In a world of connected crises like this, which one single event from this day is the one that's truly going to shape tomorrow? Is it the missile launch, the closing of the strait, the controversial sanctions waiver? In a day this packed with consequence, which headline will history remember as the one that changed everything?